Family. Test. Are we on? Are we on?
Are we on? I'm on.
Test.
These guys are on too, as you will hear.
Great. So Ben wanted me to introduce Wendy Haddad and Eric Mack. My name's Mike Williams. And this gentleman over here, I think, what's your name? David Allen.
I got it.
And we're here to talk about the continuation of what Mark was talking about, which is what happens to those kiddos that are doing great work and what happens as they move through the family experience, as they grow up, and the ultimate question, will you be ready when you leave the home nest? Can you handle the freedom? And David will be our moderator.
Yeah, well, relationship real quick, and you may expand on it too. Got an email about this guy named Mike Williams, who was a senior guy at General Electric at the time, like a healthcare. And he had run across my stuff. It was really fabulous. He was writing a blog about how he was using it with his kids. I went, that was way cool. Anyway, connected with Mike, very long story, very short. Mike wound up coming in with us and taking the role, the strategic sort of CEO kind of role that I had. And of course, we were implementing holacracy, so we just were defining all those roles, and Mike took a bunch of them. So you were did that for us for a very important 5 years, 6 years of our company's growth. And of course, your kids were growing up in the meantime. Eric was my CTO for how many years, Eric?
Long time.
Long time, 15 years, something like that. Eric homeschooled his kids, and he was a serious GTDer from early on, and you can tell that story too. So which one of you wants to go first?
I'll just start real quickly. We had the good fortune to meet in 1995, and I was so sold on the concept of GTD for what it did in my own life. And I was at one point reflecting with you, and I said, gosh, why did I have to learn this as an adult? And David shared his vision that someday, everyone would just have this as part of their operating system. And around that same time, my wife and I had made the decision to homeschool our children. We had Wendy and her sister, and then 2 more to come along. And so we just implemented these methodologies into the fabric of daily life. And you'll hear a little bit more about that as we go.
Yeah. Wendy, a few comments from you, just an intro here.
Well, first I was going to say, Ben, yesterday you mentioned you don't remember when you started doing GTD. I definitely don't remember when I started doing GTD because it's been a part of my whole life since I think even before the book was written. I know
Wendy's Eric's daughter, by the way,
yes,
in case we didn't make that clear.
I'm connected. So, yeah, I grew up with GTD as a part of school. Doing weekly reviews, doing one of my favorite features was the mind sweep, and that stress relief. Mark talked about that a little bit.
But you also started early. In fact, Mike's story about the laundry basket, that's the first place that we started. So even before Minesweep, it was about socks and blocks.
I didn't have an allowance, so one of my first jobs was Dad paid me to help label his folders in his many drawers. So, even helping him with his reference systems. So, somebody mentioned the label maker yesterday, and I leaned over to him and I said, I put a label maker on my wedding registry last year, and so, it's that ingrained. So.
I'm going to fast forward because we have the slide ready to show you. Tell them about what this was, Eric. This was a few years later.
So we started the GTD Breakfast Club. And so in the morning, as part of our getting together to have breakfast, this is a shout out to the Mack family. You have Wendy, Amy, Kelly, and I just realized the other day that she was holding the GTD book. I forgot about that. And then, of course, myself, my daughter Emily, and my lovely wife Kathy. And we would just take some of the simple lessons and learn how to apply them. I think what's interesting, and if I could leave you with this point in case you're a parent or know someone who is, or someone who cares about young people, is that you don't have to use all the technical vocabulary. In fact, I think, Wendy, when you spoke in 2009, I think you shared you had to go look up some of the terms.
I had to reread Getting Things Done before I came here to remind myself what parts are GTD or not, because that's kind of the beauty of it. You call it advanced common sense, David, and I've used it so much that sometimes I don't even remember, oh, this is GTD and this is the technical term for whatever. It's just a habit. It's a way of looking at the world.
And as long as you're speaking, I'll have your father toot your horn and your sister's horns. Come on, some of the things that these ladies accomplished, in the process. Just might as well spill the beans here a little bit.
I was thinking when Mike talked about clear space, and I was thinking how that has manifested itself in each of my daughters and what they were able to do with clear space. So I'll let Wendy tell her story, but I would like to tell the story of Amy. Amy got it in.
I have an identical twin, by the way, so we're talking about my twin. So.
Hi, Amy. Amy decided that she would be a composer and that she would put together, not just compose a song, but a full multimedia 90-minute presentation with visuals and graphics and narrative and a 50-piece orchestra. And she spent years, even before she got to university, to learn how to do it the university way, studying and learning and teaching. And she would go and minesweep her ideas, she would get the clear space, and then she would just be creative.
If I could jump in on the story. So David, talking about getting things out of your head, the sister version of that story was at night around like 2 or 3 in the morning. We would share a room, and Amy would jump up out of bed. The covers go flying. She'd run into the closet, grab her Palm Zyre 72, and start humming a melody in the closet in the middle of the night to get it out of her head so that she wouldn't forget it, so that she could record it the next day. So that even became like a midnight practice, contributing to that. I don't know, I didn't want to cut you off.
No, that's good. The other thing we did, and I'll let Wendy talk about what this has done for her in school and career, but the other thing that we did is we wanted to teach logic, and so we decided, we lived in a remote community, we decided to start a homeschool robotics club. And we competed, David was one of our sponsors, but we were really using it as a way to teach critical thinking and logic and next action processing. And so if any of you have participated with the first robotics competitions, you have an end goal and then you have a process and you have to program the computer to do the job. And so that was perfect for next action thinking. What is the outcome? What are the projects identified to support that outcome? What are the next actions for each one? And that was just an extraordinary process. If you want to talk to me off stage, I could tell you all kinds of stories about that, but it really was extraordinary.
At what age?
Oh,
I started when I was 9 years old.
Which meant your sister was
also
5, 6, and 7.
And so I competed for 6 years, and then I spent another 6 years touring around judging competitions, training judges how to judge the technical portion of the robots. So I became a lead tech judge, and then coaching as needed, working robotics summer camps for a few years. And then for me, my story, just to keep it short, is GTD is again, given me a way of looking at the world where things aren't daunting. We often tell kids, you need to do great things, but it helped me know how to break down those big steps into little ones. And it's like, I can do that next action, I can do that next thing. Whether that's programming a robot. I remember saying, I was the youngest one on the team at the time, and I was very upset that the older ones got all the opportunities. So I told myself by my 6th year, I was going to be the most important person on that team. And then just said, I'm going to find programming, and I'm going to get into programming. Later, that helped me with problem solving. I was telling Mike this, that almost every job I've ever held has actually found me. With the exception of one other job, I've never had to seek that. And that's just been opportunities being ready, and they've always stretched me. When I was a senior in college, I double majored, double minored, and worked several jobs, graduated debt-free, and found out how to do that with that work ethic there. Was offered a full-time job creating the educational technology department for my university, and then managing a team and then a project team. Working in the C-suite with that. I was 22 at the time. And then now I work at the Walt Disney Company as a product manager or a service manager. Crazy things, never thought I'd be there before, but it gave me the confidence to be able to just tackle new things and unexpected things and just follow that journey.
You know,
Mike?
just if I can jump
go
on
ahead,
one
yes.
thing just real quick. As a parent observer about that, one of the things that was interesting for me was watching how well adapted they were at taking whatever hit their way. And we noticed this. Now remember, we homeschooled all the way up through high school. So when they went away to university, they had to deal with the same thing that everyone else at university does, which is all this stuff hitting you at day one. And do you want to speak to that?
Oh, I don't want to take up
It
too
just
much
seemed like it
time,
was
but
a no-brainer for you.
I know the concern is always, homeschoolers can adapt. And I had no problems balancing, multiple classes. I think what shocked me about going to university is that nobody else did this stuff. And I was like, what? This is crazy. You don't write things down. You don't do, in the GTD for Teens book, they talk about a portable, weekly review station, I think is what you guys called it. And I had my little 3-fold folder, and I had my inbox of assignments that came in, my outbox of assignments that came out, and, a reference section for all my syllabi, so I knew what was coming up next, and every week reviewed that. And it was, I literally, that helped me get through college.
It's just natural.
Yeah, I was flabbergasted that nobody else did that in college. So, yeah, it was interesting.
Thanks. Yay. Mike?
So I'll pick up from college and work backwards. And so with Hannah, my daughter, who's here, Hannah and Conrad, my children are here, one of the things we had was GTD coming up through the system, and then she reached a point of complexity. So life is always a good teacher. So with GTD for teens or for young adults, life is the teacher, and then you handle life. So from college, she found that she was having more responsibilities and a lot of stuff was coming her way. So by teaching her the areas of focus, specifically roles and accountabilities, we could segment her work out a little bit and reduce the stress, and she had a better way to handle that. Shout out to Ken Case because she used OmniFocus, and she's doing a great job with that. Rewind back to about 8th grade, and I remember, again, thinking about the horizons of focus with Hannah and imagining, how can I imagine with Hannah going forward? How can I imagine with my son going forward? And one of the tools that I used was the Common School Application Form. And I remember having the transition conversation between 8th grade and 9th grade and asking her or explaining to her that in a few years, somebody's going to be asking you some questions. They're going to ask you, what kind of projects did you do in school? What teachers are going to give you references? What are you going to talk about in an essay that you might have to write and explain? And what kind of stories can you tell? And those open-ended questions led to thinking into them over the next couple years. And the reward there was we'd go to Starbucks every so often. I'd buy her a nice sugary Frappuccino, and everything kind of poured out. We had some daddy-daughter time, and we could think about those things. And I think the last thing I would throw in here is going back to weekly reviews and reflection. And one of the things that showed up in multiple ways. First, with the David Allen Company, I did some work at Cal State Fullerton. And one of the keystone habits that those college students got into that provided the most value was a weekly review. Mm-hmm. It allowed them to catch up. Mm-hmm. I think Hannah would say the same thing. And now I'm working with Conrad on curating his weekly review. And we show a weekly review, but remember, you can always customize it to make it your own. And start with the crappiest, most imperfect weekly review. The thing to do is just show up consistently over time, and really good things show up. Mm-hmm. Because ultimately, GTD is a bag full of well-placed questions. And if you let the questions do the work, you don't have to do so much work.
Absolutely.
What was the hardest thing you folks dealt with in all of this? Or the thing that you found most challenging, or the thing that was most resistant from your kids at
Wendy.
any point in time?
I'm challenging. You know, I think I actually was very inspired by Charles's comment about having a reward at the end, and because I've been sitting here going, you know, I'm really good about doing a weekly review at work, and when I get off of work, I'm so tired that I'm like, oh, I don't want to do it personally, and so I think weekly reviews for me have been consistent, but more or less in spurts. Sometimes there's the week in between or 2 weeks in between, and things get just a little chaotic. I think for me, just, you know, Hannah and I were actually talking about this a little bit, but, you know, you're the rebellious teenager, and you know, there was a period of time when I was like, I don't want to hear GTD one more time, you know, and I like David, I like when he comes over, but if I hear GTD, I'm done. And, you know, it's like David Covey, and growing up in a Covey household, I grew up in a GTD household, and so it's like, I get it, Dad. And I think that what was hard is that you were so excited. You're like, no, I don't want to lose you. Let's talk about it more. And I'm like, no, let's not talk about it. Like, we're done. And then it was really in college and in later high school when I realized how far ahead I was because of GTD that I fell back in love with it and stuff. And so I think it's just learning how to embrace certain aspects. Sometimes the entire system can be overwhelming, and so finding the one thing or that's appropriate in the morning to bring you through, I think is helpful, rather than always looking at in the totality.
I'll jump in real quick. So one of the things that was challenging for me as an adult was remembering what it was like to be a beginner. And many times our kids are going through first-time experiences. So, for example, they might be working on a school project and they have to make a phone call to an adult. And we're like, just pick up the phone and make the call. Right. What's the big deal? And it's like, oh, you've never, ever, ever called an adult. Wow, so that's, a little role play and a little empathy and understanding from dear old dad might go a long way. Because we've done it thousands of times and we forgot the beginner's mind. So for me, I think that was what the process taught me as I was trying my best to teach, our children.
People have often asked me, they said, David, how old do kids need to be before they learn GTD? And I'll let you guys maybe answer that. My answer is pretty simple. How old do they need to be to understand how would you like Christmas to be? What would you like it to be like? What can you imagine that we could do? Well, great. We don't see a Christmas tree, Eric. I remember that conversation.
That's right.
What do we need to do next?
Do you want to hear it from her end or my end?
I know. you guys pick. But
right.
I say as soon as they are old enough to understand that conversation, that's GTD.
So that conversation took place when Amy and Wendy were 4. And my wife goes all out decorating the house. We had a large house and lots of decorations, but the house was still set up for Thanksgiving. And the girls wanted to set up the tree. And I decided, like any homeschooling dad, to make everything a teachable moment. And so we got out the whiteboard, and I said, great, you want to set up the tree. This is what the house looks like. So tell me what the house will look like when it's decorated. And I'm going to race here, but they went through all the machinations of what. I said, great, can you imagine that? Yes, they can imagine. I says, great, now look out. And they saw that the house was nowhere near ready, and there were probably 6 hours of work to do. But then they began to throw out, oh, I could do this, I could contribute this, I could do this. We made a list, we put initials, and then the girls are running around trying to clean this up, do that, cross things off. And then we had a big party and set up the tree.
Didn't they get gold stars?
Or something, yeah.
Like, yes.
But the point was, that was introducing the natural planning model, at a very young age. We did it again with a trip to Disneyland and all kinds of things. But for them, it was just, okay, visualize the current situation, take a look at the present reality, subtract one from the other, figure out what we need to do, and then write it down, and then what's the single next step?
Remember that, Wendy?
I remember making lists about Christmas. I don't quite remember it in the context of GTD. Right. But I can tell you one quick story real fast, not to steal that from earlier, but David Allen got me to do ironing. And the way he got it is my dad, dragged my mom for a romantic weekend to a GTD conference. And
sorry, Kathy.
The way that my mom tells the story is that David asked,
So David started the conference and he said, folks, if this conference were a wild success for you, what would be true?
And Mom said my ironing would be done. She had 4 girls, busy lifestyle, and Dad had her write it down. And then halfway through, he's talking about delegation, and guess who got delegated the ironing? She went out and bought 3 ironing boards and an assembly line, and so we all
The night of the seminar.
did that. So thank you, David. I now know how to iron, but
Mike, you have some final words.
So final words for me is, GTD for family. So I view us as a family community here, a global family, really. And part of this book that Mark and I and David worked on was to prepare the next generation. So how can we give them the tools, the skill sets to be successful in a increasing complex world? So it's up to us. We're all family. Caring adults, working with kiddos. So whatever you can do to support that or support your community or help reach out and help somebody up from the next generation, it'll pay big dividends in the future.
Cool. Any closing comments from you guys?
I'm just so grateful. I think to be here, to be a part of that, and then I do a lot of volunteer work with junior high and high school students, and so when I read through Getting Things Done for Teens, it resonated with me, having gone through that more recently, and then I think it's really important. I don't say that to pat myself on the shoulder, but really to say that, I have fellow students and colleagues and friends who have gone through college who struggled and had to learn the hard way. And while there was a lot of work and work was challenging, it was never overwhelming. And so it is an interesting world that we're in, I think, as Mark was saying. And I feel very well prepared. And so I would just encourage you, if you know people, again, maybe just find that one aspect of GTD, whether it's the mind sweep or, what's the next action that's given me a vocabulary as a millennial going into the workforce, to be able to step in with confidence and go into meetings and run meetings and keep it efficient. And so definitely I don't believe that there is an age when then you should start teaching it. And so as the master experiment, yeah. So
I'll just be really quick, but you're welcome to talk to us during a break. Watching my daughters go through university and then into the workforce, and you just with all of your promotions successively, we've been talking and mentoring, and Wendy would frequently complain about the amount of projects that seemed to land on her plate. And I said, well, Wendy, these are really big projects. They're not going to give them to someone with a track record of not getting them done. And so she has that new challenge, learning to say no or manage that. But it really is extraordinary. And I'm so grateful to have been able to meet you, David, and to learn the skills to equip my children with this and many others. And it's extraordinary. Go out there and teach someone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.